Hey, it's Kyle here. Today I'm going to show you how to make a timer that looks just like this. You can put your own colors in or your own duration, and you can use it in any presentation tool, PowerPoint, Google Slides, you name it, you can put it there. For this tutorial, we're going to be using Adobe Illustrator, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe Photoshop. If you're not familiar with those tools, that's okay. If you watch the tutorial step by step, you should be able to follow along, even if you're just a beginner. To create this timer, we're going to follow 4 basic steps. First, we're going to build our shapes in Illustrator. Then we'll create the timer in After Effects. We'll then export the timer as a video file from After Effects, and then pull that video file into Photoshop and export it as a GIF. Once you have Illustrator open, we're going to create a new document using a width and height of 500 by 500. You can use whatever width and height you want, and realistically, you want to use the smallest possible for your application, simply because that's going to make your file size smaller and that's going to make your images load quicker. That's especially true if you're putting this on the web. Once you have your width and height put in, go ahead and hit create. The first thing we want to do is create our shape using the Ellipse tool. So I'm going to press L on my keyboard, find the center of my page, click and hold, and then if I hold Alt and Shift as I drag, it's going to create a perfect circle. I'm going to drag out to the very borders of my artwork there. Now, the easiest way to get the stroke that we want is to switch over to the selection tool by pressing V, come over here, click on stroke, and increase our stroke size to whatever size you prefer. In this case, I'm just going to use a stroke size of 50. Now, something you'll want to make sure you do is on your align stroke options here, you'll want to make sure you select these inside strokes. One thing I should also mention is if your stroke menu is collapsed, it might look like this. Just click on these 3 lines, hit show options, and then you'll see all the same options that I have here. Now, I have my timer outline, however, I want to create this in a different color. So I'm going to go ahead and select my stroke here, come over to my color, double click, and now I can use this color wheel to really turn this into any color that I want. We'll go ahead and go with blue here. So I select blue, hit OK. If I have a specific color in mind, I can also put in a hex or HTML code there. That's going to give me whatever color I want. So I hit OK. Now I've got my ring that I want. However, I also want to put a layer underneath so that as this ring disappears, an outline will be left showing where the ring was. So I'm going to collapse this menu, open up my layers menu, and create a new layer. I'm going to copy that same circle, hold Control C, and copy it onto my layer 2. When I paste, I want to hit Control Shift V. That's going to paste in the exact same place on the new layer. However, now I'm going to make this. However, now I want to make sure I name these layers appropriately. This is going to make it easier when I jump into After Effects. So I'm just going to call this top layer top, and then I'll call the bottom layer bottom. I got it. Looks like I have my caps lock on there. Whoops. Top. There we go. And bottom. There we go. With my bottom layer, so I'm going to go ahead and hide my top layer momentarily, select my bottom layer, and change this color to just an off-white, a little bit like that. Now it's just a little bit different color. I don't know if I like that yellowish, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up and maybe come a little bit more like that. There we go. Got a little bit off-white there. Now when the blue disappears, that white color will be left over. Now with my timer shapes drawn, I'm going to come up to my file and hit save and choose to save this. We're just going to save it in my downloads folder. I'll call it 5-minute timer and hit OK. Now it's time to pull up After Effects. Now that After Effects is open, I'm going to click on New Project and New Composition. I'm going to use these settings, basically a width of 500, height of 500. That's because that's the same width and height of my Illustrator file. Let's give this a name. We'll just call it 5-minute timer. There we go. Something that you'll want to make sure you adjust is the frame rate right here. In this case, I'm using a frame rate of 1 frame per second. That's a really unusual frame rate, so you're not going to find that in any of the presets. The reason why we went with 1 frame per second is because we want that ticking motion to be really clear. So we're going with 1 frame per second. You can choose to adjust that if you want a little bit more smooth transition as your timer moves around. As far as your timer length, you'll probably want to give it just a little bit of a few seconds past whatever your timer length is set to. So in this case, I'm going 5 minutes and I want it to be set to 5 minutes and 2 seconds. That just gives me a little bit of leeway. I'll still be able to export the file to exactly 5 minutes, and I'll show you how to do that. So I click OK. And now we're ready to import our files from Illustrator. So I right click over in my project area, select import file, and here's my 5-minute timer. I double click there. I want to import a composition is the option I want to select. And then for this case, I'm going to go with my document size because it will work exactly as I planned with my Illustrator file being 500 by 500. So I hit document size, hit OK. Now I'm going to open up this folder of the documents that I just imported. We'll put top down first, and then we'll put bottom down. And the first thing I want to do is create that radial wipe so that as my timer moves around, the blue is going to slowly disappear as my timer moves down. So I'm going to come right over here to my effects. I'm going to search radial. You'll get a lot of different options. You want to make sure you select this radial wipe right here. The other radial wipes up here, this bottom and top one, they work a little bit differently. So you'll want to select this radial wipe right here. Just click and drag this onto the top. And then in your effect controls, I'm going to basically, all I need to do is at the very beginning, add a keyframe that is 0% complete as far as my transition. And then move to the very end of my composition and change the transition to 100%. So that now, if I move my time code indicator, my time indicator here, you can see it's doing exactly what I want it to. Every single frame that moves, it's going further and further down. I'm just holding control and hitting my right keyboard key. That way you can kind of see as it ticks down like that. Now, the second thing we need to do is add in the timer. So to do this, I'm first going to add in a text layer. And I don't actually need to type anything here. Instead, I'm going to come over to my effects and I'm going to search time code. And there's an effect called time code. I'm going to click and drag that onto my empty text layer there. And we've now got a time code. If you don't see this little circle with the crosshair here, this little crosshair here, you'll want to adjust the position just a little bit, and then you should see that appear. Once that's appeared, go ahead and move the time code to where you want it. This first is going to be, in our case, we really only want to show minutes and seconds. So I'll show you how to do that. The first thing that we want to do though is with this text layer, we're going to want to adjust the text size. So I'm going to come up to my effects panel right up here on my time code effect and increase my text size. I'm going to increase it significantly and then again use that little tag there. So we're going to want those two and we're going to put it about right there because if you can imagine our box is going to be about right here. So this is about, that's all that's going to show there. And then secondly, I want to change my color of my text. I'm going to change the text color to this blue and then let's change the box color to white. That way it'll just blend in. Now the next two steps are going to involve, because right now we have a timer but it's counting up. So we're going to do two things. One, we're going to make it so that we only see the minute and seconds. And then two, we're also going to make it count down. And to do both those things, we need to pre-compose this layer. So I'm going to right click and pre-compose this layer right here. And we'll just call this timer. So we've now got a pre-composition. And the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and reverse this so that it starts at 5 minutes. So I come up here on the timer, right click, and do time reverse layer. And it's now just reversed my pre-composition there. And I'll need to adjust this a little bit because I made my composition longer than 5 minutes. So I've got 5:01, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hold Alt and scroll on my timeline here so I can kind of see where I'm at. Move my time code indicator. That's where we want that. So we're going to now move our workspace to right there. So now when we export this, it's going to cut off this section right here. It won't have that in there. We'll also need to fix this right here. You'll notice it kind of basically is cutting off a little bit earlier than we want it to. So all we need to do is come over to our top layer. I'm going to use the keyboard command U. That opens up all attributes that have keyframes associated with them. And you can see here's my transition completion keyframe. I'm going to select that by click and drag around it and then just move it. Now the timer works exactly like I want. It moves down with every second and it just kind of ticks down just like that. The only thing I need to fix now is I need to get rid of the space around the timer. So to do that, I'm going to go and collapse that layer here, select timer. And with the timer pre-composition selected, I'm going to come up here to my square or rectangle tool rather. Select that, and basically now I'm going to draw a rectangle around my whatever I want to display. So we want this to be about right there. And that creates a mask around this layer. After you do this, you'll want to scrub through your animation to make sure that it doesn't ever display anything that you don't want it to display. I found that sometimes 11 is a little bit tricky when it's at the 11-second mark on really any of them. Looks like I got it perfect this time, but I'll go ahead and show you just in case. If I click on this pen tool, I can adjust this. If I open this up, select mask path, and I have the pen tool, and I double click on a corner, I now can then edit my shape. So let's say, for example, I had it like that and it was a little bit too far. Like you can see 11, it jumps over. That's where it gets me a lot of times. So I can select this pen tool, double click on a corner, and then just drag to where it needs to be. And then you'll want to scan through, make sure that you got it the right size so that only the things display that you want and nothing more. So now we're ready. I think we have our timer just about finished. Oh, we forgot one step, and that is to get rid of this transparency right here. Now, sometimes you may think, hey, transparency could be good. I can put it on any background and you're good to go. But with GIFs, transparency just does not look really good. It doesn't export really well. It doesn't create nice clean edges. So you're much better off just adding the color of the background, whatever I'm putting this on. If I'm putting on a red background, I want to add red. If I'm adding this to purple, I want to put purple, right? But to do that's really pretty simple. I just come down to my layers, right click, and select New, Solid. And then it's going to ask me, hey, what do I want to call this? In this case, I'm just going to call it white because I'm just adding a white background. You can double click this color here, and then, if you wanted red, you'd select red. I want white, so I'm just going to go down and select white. You can put in your hex codes just like usual and hit OK. And OK. It's going to put it right on top, so let's go ahead and click and drag this down to the bottom. And now we are good to go. We got what we wanted. So the next step is to export this. So let's come over to our, I already have my render queue up right here, but if you don't have that, then click on File, come down to Export, and you're going to want to add to render queue. This is not the process I normally use with After Effects. Usually I like to add to the media encoder just because it allows me to work in After Effects while I'm still rendering out something else. And honestly, I've just found it works a lot faster. There's a lot more options. There's a lot of reasons to use Media Encoder. But the limitation that I found is in Media Encoder, I couldn't find an export option to export at only 1 frame per second. I couldn't get that frame rate. And I don't know if that's just because I'm not familiar with it. But ultimately, what I ended up doing was just adding it to the After Effects render queue. I have to select my output, so I come in here and select where I want this to output. I'm just going to call it 5-minute timer. It's an AVI file. Perfect. That'll work. Hit save, and then I hit render. And it's going to go ahead and render that. This will take a long time depending on the computer that you have. Once it's all done, you get a little ding, and we're good to go. Now to check this, we can really quickly just open up that downloads area and open up that video. And I can watch this video and I can see, okay, it started exactly where I wanted it. It looks like it's doing exactly what I want. And it ends right at 1 second. Perfect. So this file works, but we want to convert this into a GIF. The reason why is because videos are not as compatible. They're also much larger as far as file size is concerned, so that can create problems for us. The other challenge is that oftentimes in most applications like PowerPoint or whatever presentation tool you're using, oftentimes the user has to click play, and we don't want that to be the case here. We actually want this timer to start as soon as we open up the file. So what we're going to do now is pull this video file into Photoshop, and that's really easy to do. All you have to do is open up Photoshop. Once you open up Photoshop, you just look for that file in your browser, in your Windows browser or your file browser. And it'll open up, look like this. You can double check, make sure it's doing what it should be doing. Still moving at 1 frame per second. Still have that timer there. No problems. Looks like it's doing great. We don't actually have to do any editing in Photoshop. We just need the export features that are available here. So we come up here and click File, Export, and we want to save for web. This is going to pull up our save for web options. Depending on how complex you made your shape or you made your objects and things in Illustrator, if you did what I did, then you can select for your preset just GIF 32 no dither. That'll work just fine. And you want to select the smallest number here that you can and still get the quality that you want. The number represents how many colors are going to be present. So when I select 128, that's going to be a larger file size because potentially we're using more colors in that example. But I just want to go with 32 because my colors are really simple. I don't think that I need much more than 32 colors in this case. So it's going to keep my file size smaller, which is good. As far as the dither, I don't need that because I put the white background behind it. I'm going to basically go with these settings the way they are. The only thing I want to change is I want to change this to looping options once because I don't want the timer to restart once it finishes. So let's jump to the first frame. Okay, that looks how we want. We'll kind of skip through a few frames. Yep, it's doing what we want. Let's jump to the last frame. That's what we want. Skip through a few frames. Okay, it's looking good. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And we'll just save this as 5-minute timer GIF. And now let's go ahead and pull up PowerPoint just to kind of give you an idea of what this can do for you. So we'll do a blank presentation. Go ahead and just get rid of this template junk. And let's drag in our GIF. Now you'll notice it just plays automatically. So I can take this timer and set it down here if I'm waiting on a timer for something, and this is how our timer will display. And again, we go back and change the colors if we wanted to. We go back and change any details that we wanted to. In fact, one cool quick tip is if you're working with After Effects and Illustrator, say I want this to be a different color, I can just pull up my Illustrator file, jump over to my layers. We're gonna unselect the bottom, so now we're just selecting the top here. Double click this layer. Let's change this over to a kind of a dark green olive color. There we go. Hit File, Save. Now, if I jump over to After Effects, that color immediately takes effect, and all I have to do is export and go through Photoshop again. I can change those colors of the timer really easy. If I double click on my timer, it'll allow me to jump back into this layer, and now I can change this color really easily. So all of this is easily customizable. Thanks for watching so much. I hope you have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.